Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's e-permits webinar on the topic of preventing exposure to asbestos. I've just seen the screen click over with a couple more attendees, so we're just going to give it a couple of minutes and then we'll start. So, although it may be silent, I've not disappeared, so just hold on and we'll start in a couple of minutes. Okay, there's still some names clicking through, so I'll just give it another 30 seconds or so and then we'll start off. Okay, it's midday, so we'll get started. Thank you for spending your lunch break with me, as it were. Today we're going to be looking at the issues around preventing exposure to asbestos, and we will look at how systems such as e-permits can help manage and control some of these particularly risky areas. Asbestos is still a major health concern, and we know that, but it's interesting that things that are not put out as headline news include statistics like last year, there were 144 work-related fatalities. In that same period, 500 people were killed on the roads for driving for work-related reasons. But every year, 5,500 people die from diseases directly linked to the exposure to asbestos. And currently there is over 6 million tonnes in our schools, over 80% of them, hospitals, most of them in London, and also other UK business buildings. So it's still a major issue of concern. It's really a stealth risk as well as a health risk, as I've deemed there. It's not deemed as a significant risk to health unless, of course, it's disturbed and fibres contaminate the breathable air. Either that's ambient air just in the room that you're in, or it's forced through air conditioning systems and so forth. The thing is, you don't see the results of the contamination until years after exposure. There are cases going through courts today that go back to the 70s and 80s when the problem just wasn't seen in the same way that it is today. Now, obviously, organisations are taking all the right precautions that they can to protect their employees and anybody that comes on site for any work that's being done. But the issue is we don't see the effects of these precautions for years until the disease rates fall, and they can then be directly attributed to the changes in process. So we could be still another 30, 40 years away from being able to say, yes, what we've done has helped in this. So the question is, are we sure we're doing enough? Or are we in the famous Donald Rumsfeld speech from a few years ago? Are we in the world of known unknowns, or even worse, the unknown unknowns? So what are we doing at the moment? The Control of Asbestos Regulations, I've just taken some snips from it here and summarised and abbreviated it. But every employer must prevent exposure to asbestos as far as reasonably practicable. If it's not reasonably practical, they've got to ensure that exposure is to the lowest level possible by means other than the use of respiratory equipment. They have to ensure that the number of employees exposed is as low as reasonably practical. And where it's not reasonably practical, employers must have the appropriate processes and engineering controls in place and use suitable equipment, approved PPE, respiratory equipment, etc., to control any exposure at the source. The issue is, how do you define reasonably practical? It's a bit of a woolly terminology. From an HSE's perspective, it says that when determining what's reasonably practical, you need to take into account the likelihood of the hazard or the risk occurring, the degree of harm from that hazard or risk, and knowledge about ways of eliminating it or at least minimizing the hazard or risk. And they use two terms, ALARP, as low as reasonably practical, and CEFIARP, so far as is reasonably practical. And they're effectively the same thing, describing the level at which we want to see workplace risks controlled. But words like reasonably, lowest, likelihood, degree, level, etc., they're all subjective terms. And subjective approaches are fine for the known knowns, where you know exactly what the situation is, and therefore you can actually go about putting the correct procedures in place. But there's no practical, objective, measurable approach to this problem, and the term subjective becomes more risky when we start to address those known unknowns, and even more so the unknown unknowns, going back to Donald Rumsfeld's quote. The way of bridging the gap between subjective reality and this objective utopia is to start to try and bring consistency into that subjective environment. So how do you start to think about bringing in consistency? Regulations state that the asbestos register must be up to date. Companies doing the work must have current and up-to-date licenses. Risk assessments have got to be in place and valid and regularly reviewed and maintained. PPE must be suitable and applicable for the work that's going to be done. A suitably competent person must be in charge, and suitable provision of information about the work given on the related permits to work. Training for all people in all required areas must be undertaken and shown that they're in place and current. And the records must have a detailed audit trail, and in the case of asbestos, be retained for a period of 40 years at least. These measurements, they are objective, and we can measure them. The asbestos register, for example, records can be kept, updated, and tracked. For companies undertaking the work, the same thing. We can keep records of the company's licenses, keep it updated, and keep it tracked. Risk assessments, exactly the same. We can record them, keep them, update them, and track them. PPE can be checked and specified before work starts, so that you know contractors are going to be adequately covered and they're going to bring the correct equipment with them. A suitably competent person, that can be checked against training records, competency records, and so forth. And training for everybody, again, records can be kept, updated, and tracked so that we can monitor when things expire, make sure that when people turn up on site, they have all the relevant training and competency and it's current. Of course, records must have a detailed audit trail and be retained for that period of 40 years. As these are objective measurements, we can get consistency and start applying systems to manage them. If we keep all the records in one place, everything is to hand, they can be checked easily throughout the process of raising the work requests right the way through to doing the work and actually completing the work. We can ensure that records are up to date and provide adequate warning of expiry by tracking things like the dates on licenses, training and competency certificates, and so forth, and start to warn the contractors and you, the people that are requesting the work, when things are coming up to expiry. We need to be able to stop the process of requesting or planning work if there are any non-compliances in place. So if there is a situation where someone isn't trained and they're being requested to come on a job, you shouldn't even allow that request to come through. But even when the request comes through, you still have the ability to stop the request if you feel that there are any non-compliances in the process. We want to ensure that records are accessible throughout that work management process. RAMs, double check the RAMs before the job starts. Double check the RAMs before you actually issue permits, and maintain checks on contractors and what they're doing to make sure they're staying compliant throughout that process. So all this needs to be checked and tracked. Ensure that automated warnings are given if work is going to take place in the vicinity of asbestos. I may not be disturbing asbestos material in a job that I'm doing, but as a contractor, I need to have information that there is asbestos present in the area and whether any suitable additional safety precautions need to be in place for me to do the work that I'm planning to do. We need to ensure the correct PPE is worn at all times, not just specifying what you need to bring, Mr. Contractor, but when they turn up, cross-checking that the correct PPE is in place before you actually issue any documents to say, yes, you can start work. Ensure that any asbestos warnings and so forth are clearly marked on the permit to work. So there is no doubt that the contractor with that permit document knows exactly the risk areas they're going into, and the RAMs that have been specified adequately cover those risks. And ensure that any safety checklists are completed and signed off at the point of work. That needs to be done to cross-check that everything is in place and that you are happy for the work to take place and the contractor is happy to actually undertake that work at that point in time. And then obviously retain the records for any specified period for future review. So all of these things can be managed in a system, and I'm going to now show you how, for example, ePermits actually carries out that particular task by going through the whole process of requesting, raising and checking asbestos-related permits. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run a scenario where I've been invited to come in to do a particular piece of work. So I'm a contractor. I'm going to raise a request to remove asbestos-containing panels in a particular area in a building. And we'll run checks on the training and competency. We'll run checks on insurances. We'll run checks on any other activities that are actually taking place in that area at the same time, to make sure that we know before work starts that everything is as safe and compliant as can possibly be, and then show how all the things are audit trailed and tracked throughout the process. I know a lot of people may have seen ePermits before, so I'm not going to be going into detail about the backgrounds to the system. I'll just take you through the scenario and then just show at the end some of the data management aspects that show how we control the elements that we've done. So as a contractor, I've had a telephone call. I've been asked to come in and do a particular piece of work, so I'm just going to create a simple request. The request just requires me to specify where I'm going to work and then who's going to come in and do it. So 6 simple questions: what, why, where, when, and how. So first of all, which site am I coming onto? You may have a number of different sites, and these list the sites that I'm authorized to attend for any particular pieces of work that you may need me to do. So I'm going to come into a place called data centers and offices, and I'm coming in to work for the FM team. As you can see, you can have splits in responsibilities. So if you've got tenanted buildings, tenants could request things to come in. It could be the host company, or it could be an FM company involved. And this is the first level, if you like, that defines the workflow of permit requests. Who are the people that need to sign these things off? Who needs visibility of what's happening? So I'm coming in to work for FM company. So now I'm into my 6 simple questions. The first couple are who and when, so I can add in here a works order number, that number that I've been given. It may come from your CAFM system. And this is me, specialist contractor. That's the company I work for. And the competent person I'm going to send on the team is a guy called Steve. And I'm going to send this chap, Richard, to attend the work as well. When are we going to do the work? It's a bit of an emergency call out, so we're coming in to do it tomorrow. We're going to start at 9:30. We should finish on the same day, and we're aiming to finish at, let's say, 4. The system does understand things like shifts, so if you have any specific rules about jobs taking place over shift periods, the system will also track that for you. So what's the next thing we're going to do? My company actually provides lots and lots of different RAMs, so we do lots of different pieces of work for you. But specifically, I'm coming in to do work on a particular item. So I'm coming in to do work on the fabric of the building. And what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be doing some removing. So I'm going to be removing fabric. This is now where I can now start to filter down the RAMs. So now we've just got 1 RAMs that I have submitted to you in the past and you have approved. So they're valid RAMs and they're only specific for working in this area. So as you can see, ePermits filters down RAMs so that they're service and location specific. So I can't, for example, just pick a random set of RAMs to come in and do work in a particular area. It won't allow me to do that. So I'm coming into work on there, and now I'm coming into work. So this is the building, and I've got 4 levels. I've got a lower basement level, I've got a roof, upper level, and a roof. I'm coming in to work on the roof upper level, and I'm going to be obviously put a bit more information in than that, but it'll just do for these demonstration purposes. And why am I doing the work? It was an emergency call out. So here are now some specific risks. I'm working in the roof upper level, so I'm actually going to be working at height. So that's a specific risk I've identified. And the system has already identified that asbestos is present in this area. And I can't change this. This is automatically ticked by the system. So it's saying, okay, I'm going to be working at height and there are asbestos issues here. So the next step, this is now going to start looking at what I can do and how I submit a permit request. Now you'll notice at the bottom, my request is actually grayed out. So I cannot submit this request because I've got some non-compliances in the system. And we grade non-compliances in three ways. First of all, there's green ones. So this chap's site induction has expired. So I will be warned that Richard needs to conduct his site induction before he attends site. And all the way through the process, right to the point of issue, there are double checks to say, has Richard been inducted? If I get to the point of issuing the permit and I haven't been inducted, you can't issue that permit until I've gone through the induction process. So it will trap it. But it doesn't stop me actually submitting the permit request. We have amber warnings. We've got a rule in the system that says we like our contractors to submit permit requests no less than 3 days before the work's due to be done. Now, this is an amber warning. It doesn't stop me submitting that request because obviously in this instance, it's an emergency call out. So you actually want me to come in and do that as soon as possible. So when you receive a permit request, which we'll go through in the next stage, you'll be able to override that and say, yes, I'm happy for that work to take place. But the things that have actually trapped this is we've got some red warnings here. Now, you must have all of your team trained in work at height. So the reason behind this is this chap, Richard, actually doesn't have any training at all. So it's showing how we're tracking the training and competency records. I'll put a guy in that I know is properly trained and qualified to do the work. Go back to the next step. Go back to the final stage. And now you'll see at the bottom here, I've got a red submit button. So I now have a compliant permit request. The only potential exception is the lead time now. So everybody's inducted, everybody's okay, and everybody's trained to do that work. Now we're going to look at the asbestos side of things. So will the fabric of the building be disturbed? Yes, it is going to be disturbed. That's part of the job that I'm coming in to do. So now I need to upload a survey. So you will have provided me with an asbestos survey for that particular area. So I can now upload that survey and say this is the way that I'm going to be doing it and what type of work is going to be carried out. And you've got a list of survey, non-licensed work, notifiable non-licensed, non-asbestos or licensed work. So let's just say this is licensed work. So what type of respiratory equipment are we going to use? Let's say we're going to use full-face equipment for this piece of work. And now we get notification that we've done compliance checks again. So the contractor has got a valid asbestos license. All the users have valid full-face fit training. All of them have LW training, and all of them had a medical with the HSE, for the HSE with the doctor. And if I've got an HSE reference number, I can pop that into the system here, but as it certifies here, it can be done later. So we come down to the task. This is what I'm going to do. I can go and double check my own RAMs if I want to, just to be sure that I'm happy that they cover what I want to do here. And this is where we can now start to specify PPE. So for site access, I'll always wear a helmet. I'll always wear safety boots and a high-vis jacket. But obviously for doing the asbestos work, I'm going to be wearing a face mask. And you can specify whatever items of PPE in your own system. So we'll just have to put here that face mask is actually this full face mask that we're talking about here. So if I'm happy with that permit request, I can now go back and submit that permit request. And now it's specifying there are going to be 3 permits in this bundle. The first one is an access permit from 9:30 till 4. I have a work at height permit from 9:30 to 4, and I can change the times on this if I need to. And I'm going to have an asbestos permit request, again, here from 9:30 to 4, and I can change the times should I need to. So when I submit this, This is now going to issue an email alert now to everybody within your organization who's actually authorized to approve the permits that I've requested. So I've got some permit requests awaiting approval here, and these are the 3 permits that I put together. Here's an example of the permit request. This has now come to an individual called Howard Albury within the organization, that they've got permit requests that have been sent out. So the appropriate people are alerted by email. So I've done my job as a contractor, very quick and straightforward activity. I'm now going to go on as an approver. So Howard, the email that you saw, Howard can now log into the system, and he will have a number of permit requests sitting here waiting for him. This graph actually shows permit life cycles. So I've actually got a number of RAMs here that are awaiting approval. And this is only the activity for mine or my team. So if I'm only responsible for one building or even one room in a building, all I see on my graphical representation is the activity for my area of responsibility. So I've got some requests awaiting approval. I've got none overdue for issue. Nothing's actually happening on site at the moment. I've got no high-risk permits and nothing's overdue for closure. So I'm doing a good job in keeping these down to 0. If I want to go to my requests awaiting approval, here are all requests that I've got, and here is the bundle that's come through to me just now. It's for an access permit, work at height permit, and an asbestos permit, as we saw. So for demonstration purposes, I'm actually able to approve all of these permits, but in reality, access permits may be signed off by a site manager. Work at height might be someone in health and safety, and the asbestos permit may be required to be signed off by 2 or 3 different people, depending on what your process is. So we replicate those processes. So if asbestos needs more than one approver, you have to have more than one approver signing that off. And those approvers are only allowed to sign off asbestos permits. It can't be any approver in the system. They have to be tagged as asbestos. So let's have a look at the access permit. So I'm now the site manager. I'm going to look at the access permit, and it shows me various bits of information. Firstly, it's showing me that I've actually got a location clash. So I've got another job planned on that day at the same time in the same location. I can go and view those permits. I can look at what they are, who's going to come in, what's going on, what activities are going to happen. It's already been approved by myself, but I can't have this job taking place at the same time in that area because of the emergency work we've got to get done with asbestos. So I'm actually going to reject that. So I'm going to put in just a reason. I put in my password, and I can now reject that permit. So that will now actually reject the whole bundle of permits. And here now, I'll go back to my unapproved requests. I now have no clashes. So I've successfully rejected those permits. So I'm now happy that I've got nothing happening in the same place at the same time. An email will have gone back to that contractor to say, sorry chaps, you can't come in, here's the reason. You need to reschedule, and then they can then resubmit that permit request with a different date on it, and it will go through the same processes. So here now we've got that warning about the insufficient lead time, but I'm happy. It needs to be something that I want done. I've got a range of information here now telling me what I'm going to do, what's going to happen, where it's going to happen, who's actually controlling it. So all these locations are controlled by your team, FM company. And I'm going to be working at height. I need asbestos in there. I can also bring in any isolation should I want to. So, for example, I may want to put in this instance, general works isolation that just basically says I need to make sure that the area is going to be pressurized, or that all the doors to all other areas have to be locked, that I need to put signs against lifts and everything else. I need to deactivate lifts from going to the roof upper level. Whatever it's going to be, you can add additional permits in at any stage of the process to provide that level of isolation should you want to. Here it's showing me the PPE that the contractor has specified they're bringing. I'm happy with that. That's not a problem. So having reviewed everything, I'm quite comfortable that this permit request is okay. I know it's compliant. The system has already done checks on training, competency, RAMs, and so forth, but I still have the ability to go back and check the RAMs should I need to make sure that I'm absolutely 100% certain these are applicable for the job. So I'm happy to accept this permit. I put in my password, and this is now starting the audit trail process. It's showing that Howard Albury actually approved that permit. So that's now an approved permit. The contractor won't get notification of the permit approval until all the permits in the bundle have been approved. So the same process we go through again for the work at height. This might be someone in health and safety. I can see here that the access permit's been approved, but these two haven't. Again, same information presented, no clashes, same information there. View the RAMs should I need to. I obviously don't have the ability to start instigating isolations because that's not my role, just for approving a work at height permit. And then on the permit, you'll have a number of safety checklists. So this is the safety checklist for working at height, and this is just our standard template. So whatever your safety checklist would be, these would appear on the system, and you can define what ones you want to appear on the permit. Happy with the PPE? So yeah, happy with that request. I'm quite comfortable for these guys to go in and do the work, and I therefore approve that permit. So those both are now approved. Then I finally go through the process of signing off and approving the asbestos permit. Same information. I can now review the survey as well. It tells me what type of work is going to be done and all the details about that work. Again, from my perspective, I can check the RAMs, and I've got my own safety checklist that I want to appear on that permit document that will need to be ticked off and signed off at the point of issue, so that both myself and the contractor are happy that all the right precautions have been taken place and it is safe to conduct that work. So I'm happy with that too. I sign that off. It's a very quick process because all I'm doing is reviewing information, and I know that all the safety checks have been done already. So that's now approved, and that's now gone into my approved permits bundle. So I now have 3 permits here that can be approved. At the time we come to issuing the permits is when the contractor actually turns up on the day. So I now actually have 2 choices. I can either print a PDF paper version of those documents, pin them up at the place of work, and then I need to wet sign them through the process, or I have the ability to go through an electronic signature process that allows me to do signatures at the place, at the point of work, at the time of work, and do it in an automated fashion. So if I just go through that process, I've now turned up on site. So at security desk, I've turned up and the relevant people have turned up. It's Steve and Frederick. If Frederick, for example, was off sick and another person had turned up, you have the ability to go in and edit the team members for the permit. This will change the names, redo all the training and competency checks on the new individual that's turned up, and if it's all valid, it will then change the name of the people on the permit, so the record is now updated to the actual team that turned up on the day. Again, if I want to, I can instigate any isolations at this point should I need to. I'm now looking at them and I'm checking that they've got all the appropriate PPE with them, and I'm happy. So I'm now in a position where I want to sign off that permit. So I will sign it as the approver, Howard. I don't have a touchy screen, so I'm doing it with a mouse, unfortunately. But you can do this on a tablet. You can even do it on your smartphone if you want to. So I've signed it here, and then I hand my smartphone on my tablet to Steve Chandler, and he signs it himself. And that permit has now been signed. I can now generate that permit, and it will generate a PDF version of that with all the signatures in place up to that particular point. So there's the permit document. And now when I look at that actual document itself, this is just in our standard template format. You can see that it gives details of the permit, the works order number, the permit number, that there are other associated permits, who it is that's coming in, what it is that we're going to do, PPE that's required, and the signature of Howard and the signature of Steve. I'm now able to email that to Steve Chandler. So if ever Steve is challenged on site, he can just pop out his smartphone and say, look, there's my permit. It was signed by Howard and by me at this particular point in time. So yes, I'm allowed to be here. So you can always do the cross checks electronically should you need to as well. So close that one, and I can now issue that permit. Again, I have to be an approved issuer to be able to have access to this button. But yeah, you're on site now, Steve and Frederick, and you can now progress to your point of work. Same thing takes place with the work at height permit. Here's the safety precautions. So I'm either checking this at the point of work, or I might be checking that everything's done prior to the work taking place. I can now save that data change, generate that permit. Obviously I would have signed it first, but I'm just generating it here just to shortcut the process. And I can now review that permit should I need to. And I can also review the RAMs too. Close out that page. And then when I want to look at the asbestos permit, I now issue that one. And then finally got the asbestos permit. Go through the process. I'm at the point of work before the contract starts. I'm going through these things. I can put whatever I want to go in here. Sign the permit off. Howard. Sign the permit off. Steve. And then I can generate that permit too. Again, once that permit's been generated, it can be emailed to Steve Chandler. So you would now have the full bundle of documents, including the asbestos survey, RAMs, and everything else, in his possession all the way through the process. He'll now have 3 permit documents on his smartphone or his iPad, tablet, whatever. You still have the ability to reprint the permit, so you can still print off paper versions to put at the place of work should you want to. So I now issue that permit, and now they are live jobs. So now Steve and Frederick are on site, and they've actually started the work on removing the asbestos panels. So with live work, you have the ability to suspend permits at any particular time. So if an issue arises during that work process, you can suspend a permit. Permits can only be suspended in the duration of, for example, the access permit. If I was doing a number of different jobs on different days, I might have an access permit for 4 days. I'm doing job 1 on Monday, jobs 2 and 3 on Tuesday, job 4 on Thursday, and so forth. If one of them needs to be moved, I can move it within the period of that permit. But I can't take it outside of that 5-day access permit period, because we'll still need to go through, again, checks for compliance, checks for location clashes, and so forth. So you have the ability to suspend. Now, the first permit that I'm going to close, obviously, is the asbestos permit. So when the job's done, I will be going to the place of work where Steve and his guys have finished it up, and I have the ability to complete any mini audit that I need to. So was the work done safely? Were there any risks? Were there any non-compliances by the contractor? This is going to start putting together a non-compliance matrix, so that should there be any issues and you identified those issues early on, it proves that you're going through your duty of care process in making sure the work was done properly. You can add information in here about what it is that you've seen. You could even take photographs, upload photographs, and so forth into the document. So I can now sign that document. So this is now Steve signing it back. I've now finished the work, and then Howard will sign this off as saying, "Yep, okay, happy that the work's been completed. I'm satisfied." That permit is now closed for the asbestos permit. I can view that permit, and again, there's all the relevant information. So there's the tick boxes that I did and relevant signatures. Oh, I must have forgot to save the data, sorry, but all the relevant signatures on there as well. So I now have the completed documents in place. So I can close that permit off. That one's closed. I've still got these 2. I have the ability, when I go back to the front desk, that I can actually close out all of these other permits in the bundle. I can't do it for the high-risk ones, hot works and asbestos, for example, but I can now close out all of these permits. 2 guys walked in, 2 guys walked out. There wasn't a problem with work at height, so I can sign this off again. Person in charge, Steve, and person signing it off, maybe the security guard, or it may be the site manager. And again, I can then review the permit document, and it'll show me that, again, the relevant signatures, sign-offs, and so forth. So here, I've done it in the right way this time. We've got all the relevant signatures, the dates and timestamps to get everything in that process. So that is now completed. But I can obviously close out all the permits in the bundle. If I close that out, it'll also close out the worker height permit. And so now that's all done, and that job is now completed. And it's archived in the reporting system. If ever I need to go back to any particular document or any particular permit, I can use the filters on this page to go to either an individual permit or maybe look at all asbestos permits over the last 6 months by this company on this site, however you want to break it down. So that ability is all there. It will then come back to you with a list of permits, and you can actually click on any one of those permits and go to the documents themselves and all of the audit trail that's associated with it. So that's the process from raising a permit request and doing all the checks and competency checks for asbestos. So you're seeing that all the things we talked about in that presentation about bringing it all into one system and one place is done with something like e-permits, and it allows you the ability to refer to anything that you need to refer to throughout that whole process. As I promised, just a little bit of a look at the data administration side of things. So if I look at, for example, company administration, if I want to look for specialist contractor, I can review specialist contractors' documentation. I can see that they have, for example, in asbestos, they are an asbestos contractor. This shows where the license is granted, the asbestos license number, and the fact that the asbestos license has actually been uploaded, so that I can review that at any particular time. And it's a granted license. So this is the check the system goes through when we are saying we want to do asbestos work. It's checking, yes, is this an asbestos contractor, and is that license still valid, and is it a valid license and it's granted? And the second set of checks was looking at things such as the training and competency of individuals. So again, this is managed by the contractors. They need to upload the relevant information, or you can upload it on their behalf should you want to. So if I look at, for example, I'm in the wrong one. So let's look at the contractor. Sorry about that. So if we look at the contractor side of things, so the user administration, I'm now going to look at Frederick. Frederick has got bits of information in the competencies side. We're tracking everything from general activities such as competent person. It's showing here that he's a qualified electrician. He's got a C&G qualification, a certificate number, but that document hasn't yet been uploaded. We track things like inductions, work at height, high voltage, and when it comes to asbestos, we're tracking all of the different issues that we need to work. And we can put in, again, the qualifications, certificate numbers, are they experienced, and upload the relevant documents that can support this. So again, when the system's checking, it's checking, is this valid? So we know the date gained, and there may, for example, be a 1, 2, whatever period of time you want on the limitations. And some of these, obviously, in asbestos are statutory, so they may be 1-year periods, for example. So this is the information that's being tracked. When I say I'm coming into asbestos, Frederick was coming in to do full face. His test was granted on the 2nd of January this year, so it's valid, and I can go in there and I can review that should I ever need to. So that covers the topic that we were looking at with regard to asbestos management within the system. If anybody has any requests or it requires any further information on the way that we can manage asbestos within the product, my contact details are there. We do have a separate asbestos module, but we provide that asbestos module at no cost to customers because of the value we feel that this brings to a customer's environment. It is a free module within e-permits that can be configured to meet your needs. Depending on what level of detail you need to go to in terms of specifying exactly where asbestos is, it may require some extra configuration costs. But most clients that do use the module really specify it just to a location type. So I've got it in the roof upper level in this particular building, is adequate. It doesn't need to say it's in the left-hand wall halfway up. If you need to go to that level, that is a completely different issue, and there's a fair bit of implementation that needs to go on. But as you saw in the example, if I'm going to be disturbing asbestos in the roof upper level, that whole roof upper level is out of action. So I just need to monitor clashes and so forth to that level of detail. From a point of view of a permit, I don't need it from a point of view of an asset control system or a location control system. So thank you very much indeed for listening. I hope that you found it useful. Again, if there's any further information you want, my contact details are there. By all means, drop me an email and I can send you any further information that you may require. So on that, thank you very much indeed for attending. Anybody that joined after the start, it's not a problem. You will be sent a link to the webinar, so you can also download it and listen to it at your leisure. And for anybody that didn't attend, not that you can actually hear me say this now, but anybody that registered for the webinar, they will also get a link to the recording. So please feel free to pass that link on to any of your colleagues that you think may find this of use as well. And hopefully I might speak to some of you in the future. So thank you very much, everybody. Goodbye.